It'll be a conversation that I think will last throughout the summer because I think we're set up for a tale as old as time. Jerry Jones. And then in like the little like sub caption, Stephen Jones, take on another Cowboys star player. Who will win the battle? Oh, excuse me. It's tough to do that voice for too long. Otherwise, you start hacking up a lung. But it sets up another Cowboys versus star player contract showdown here. The Cowboys, as expected, they placed their franchise tag on wide receiver George Pickens. And so if nothing else, he is set to play this season with a salary guarantee of just under $28 million. That's if he chooses to play on it. Now, best case scenario is the Cowboys want to work out a long-term deal with George Pickens, but one, they obviously don't want to overpay him. Two, they obviously have other needs to fill here, including their defense, which was god-awful last year and only slightly improved after they added Quinnen Williams. Thank you, Jerry Jones, for trading away Micah Parsons. We'll see what the Cowboys do with their multiple first-round draft picks coming up. But as it stands, George Pickens, franchise tagged, $27.3 million this season. And then we have one of three options. Does he play on the franchise tag? Do they work out a long-term contract extension? Or is there a chance that George Pickens gets traded? And if I were the Dallas Cowboys, I would trade him. I would trade him because I saw everything I needed to see from George Pickens in terms of who I can rely on him. There was a quote from Martin Luther King, and I'm going to botch it. But it's basically, you can't judge a man in times of convenience. You have to judge a man in times of adversity. And what was George Pickens in times of adversity last year? The game against the Detroit Lions where the Cowboys had gotten themselves back into playoff position. They were 6-5-1 heading to Detroit, a Lions team that we had already started to see in the cracks in the foundation, and they ended up missing the playoffs too anyway. It's not like they lost to a great Lions team. They lose 44-30, but more importantly, George Pickens, 5 catches, 37 yards, 0 effort, stopping his routes. Several times you see on the replay, he gets ripped by Richard Sherman after the game, and that kind of brought everybody's attention to it. But I remember watching that game, and I'm like, where's George Pickens? Where is he? That was the game the Cowboys needed to win to logistically give themselves a real shot at making a run for the playoffs. There was 4 games after that. Vikings, who stunk, and they ended up losing them anyway. Chargers, and then they finished with the Commanders and the Giants. If the Cowboys had beaten the Lions, you can make the case that they would have been motivated enough to make the playoffs and to actually have a real shot at making the playoffs. So that was their playoff. And that was the type of performance George Pickens put through. That's all I needed to see. This is a guy that Pittsburgh got rid of after years of controversy, after saying the wrong things in the media, seemingly, being unmotivated at times. Countless times where he doesn't get the ball and he quits on the team, quits on a game, shows a lack of effort, social media posts, all the different tactics that we've seen receiver use. Oh, trade me, all these different, very, cryptic posts. And finally, the Steelers had enough. Now he's the Cowboys' problem. And he could be a 1-year problem. He could be a multi-year problem and a very expensive one, or they could trade him. And ultimately, I think this is going to end how every other Cowboys versus star player contract stare down ends. George Pickens wants to get paid. He doesn't want to have to play this season on a prove-it deal. He just basically did that last year. And the Cowboys said, no, you're going to have to do it again. Or at least they're setting that up so that they didn't lose him in free agency. Now, they have to come to an agreement by July 15th. Otherwise, George Pickens must play on the 1-year deal or choose to hold out. So we saw it happen last year with CeeDee Lamb. We saw it happen last year with Micah Parsons, and it ended in a trade. 2 years ago, what happened with CeeDee Lamb, and he got paid with about a week left to go before the season. 3 years ago, we saw it with Dak Prescott, and he got paid on the first day of week 1, on Sunday morning of week 1. This one has to get done by July 15th. And I feel like it's going to go all the way up until July 15th. And I think the best thing to do for the Cowboys would be to trade him and try to get draft picks back to then stock up on that defense, or maybe try to get a player back from another team that needs a wide receiver. But ultimately, what I think is going to happen is the Cowboys are going to pay George Pickens. Because Jerry Jones doesn't make smart football decisions. He normally makes ones that give him the biggest headlines and make the Cowboys relevant in July. Because that's when the Cowboys are at their most relevant, July and August. In January and February, not so much. When they want to be relevant, no. In December, last couple of years, no. In July, sure. It's good for business for Jerry Jones. And so I think this is going to last several months here. George Pickens wants to get paid. I don't think the Cowboys want to pay him. He's probably going to want $35 to $40 million a year. That's what CeeDee Lamb got. That's the range of Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, all the top receivers right now. And that's where the Cowboys are setting themselves up here. They have franchise tagged George Pickens. I want to get your thoughts on it. 310-840-4910, 310-840-4910. What do you think the Cowboys should do with George Pickens? By the way, the NFL salary cap just went up another $22 million this year. The 2026 salary cap is $301 million. Business is good for the NFL. Let's get producer Brandon Combs in here. He's going to be a big part of the show tonight. Combs, I think the Cowboys should trade George Pickens. What I ultimately think happens is they probably end up getting a long-term deal done and ignoring the obvious spots that they need to address, the defense, just to try to beef up that offense for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. And I think it's ultimately going to be the wrong decision. And I don't think the Cowboys will be a playoff team yet again in 2026 because of decisions like this.
Yeah, man, look, when it comes to George Pickens, I think that the Cowboys have no choice but to trade him. They said dead last in cap space available in the NFL. I mean, they $381 million, I think, is what they have right now on the payroll. Now, look, the new league year doesn't start till March 13th. They've got a long time to at least 2 or 3 weeks now to go ahead and bring that cap space down. But I think ultimately they're going to have to trade George Pickens. And I think you're right. They do have to focus more on defense. Pickens, I think if he goes to a locker room with a winning culture, be a number one, he can get that type of money that he's talking about. I don't think he's a number one right now. Do you? I think right now in a world with Justin Jefferson's, Jamar Chase's, Puka Nakua's, I mean, list goes on. You can talk about CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't think he's in that top echelon of wide receivers just yet. But I think that if he goes to a locker room where, winning is a culture, I think that George Pickens can be a guy that steps up to that next level. Now, we talk about the game against the Lions. I think he had 9 catches for 35 yards or something stupid. It was just
5 catches on 9 targets.
Or 5 catches. So it's... You find him in games like that. Sure, did he disappear? Was he locked down? What went on to it? You'd have to go back and look at the tape to figure out exactly what happened in that one single game. But I'm willing to take the 93 catches on 139 targets for 1,429 yards any day of the week. That's a number one on just about every team in the league. And I think he's got that capability. I think George Pickens brings that to the table. I do think that the Cowboys have to trade him, though. I think that that's what you're looking at right now, not only because, of salary cap reasons, but I just don't think he plays on the tag. If you're George Pickens, do you play on the tag?
I wouldn't want to. And the Cowboys, here's a distinction we got to make here. The Cowboys use the non-exclusive tag on George Pickens. So that allows him to talk to other teams when free agency begins on March 11th.